February 1979, Grand Ayatollah Khomeini returns triumphantly to Tehran after 16 years in exile. The revolution had been made reality, and in Khomeini, the figurehead around whom the opposition had coalesced, there was a ready-made leader.
Naturally, the Imam was the leader of the country, even before leaving for France or the revolution being shaped. He was a leader in the sense that when people follow a personality and pay attention and implement his sayings, he is a leader whether you like it or not.
And yet, beyond their hatred of the Shah, the opposition had little to unite them. There was no post-revolutionary blueprint, just the loose alignment of communists, democrats, nationalists, and Islamists. But if the revolution was to succeed, it was essential that its protagonists spoke with a single voice. Khomeini's supporters immediately began to marginalize all other elements of the revolutionary movement by any means necessary.
A struggle for the dominance and the definition of the revolutions broke out not only between the people who supported and surrounded Khomeini and other political groups and factions, but within the Khomeini camp itself about in which direction they want to take the revolution. It was a long, drawn-out faction struggle. It was very bloody in stages, and it was the hardliners around Khomeini who won out over the moderates in the Khomeini camp.
With no effective alternative, a referendum declared overwhelming support for a new republic. And on April 1st, 1979, less than 2 months after Khomeini's return from exile, the Islamic Republic of Iran was founded. And 30 years later, the Republic not only survives, but appears more influential than ever.
The impact of the Islamic Revolution in Iran has been enormous on an international scale. I mean, it transformed the Middle East region. It removed a key ally of the United States in the West. It's really affected much of what's happened in the Middle East since then. It's only now, with an Obama presidency, that the United States, after 30 years, is coming to terms with the fact that they are going to have to deal with Iran.
But to its critics, the success of the revolution has come at a cost, in limiting personal freedoms at home and in making powerful enemies abroad, none more so than the USA. Indeed, within days of Khomeini's return to Tehran, the city's US embassy had been briefly occupied by protesters determined to end American influence in Iran.
Let me say, the revolution was in some ways not anti-Shah, it was anti-America. Because they saw America as dictating to the Shah what to do, they saw the Shah as a representative of the United States. They wanted independence. The slogan of death to Shah cannot be separated from death to America.
So the deposed Shah's arrival in the US in October 1979, ostensibly for cancer treatment, provoked outrage. Supporters of the revolution feared the visit was part of an American plot to reinstate their ex-ruler. Even today, 30 years on, mention the Islamic Revolution, and one event above all else comes into most people's minds, and it happened here behind these walls. It was something that Ayatollah Khomeini himself described as a second revolution, and it would transform the Islamic Revolution from being an overthrow of one tyrant into something of worldwide significance. On November the 4th, 1979, some 300 protesters, calling themselves the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line, occupied the American embassy in Tehran.
They found a window they could break into at the basement level. They got a truck, I think, and pried it open and broke into the basement level.
It was the beginning of a crisis that would provide the catalyst for decades of hostility, as 63 US citizens were taken hostage.
I went out from the door. I had one of my more unsuccessful negotiating experiences at that point. I ran into a group of very excited students. Everyone was talking at once. Everybody was giving orders. Nobody was taking orders.
The students may have seemed disorganized, but they were also deadly serious.
I was blindfolded, my hands were tied to my back, and marched out, and the rain started to fall. And I didn't know if they would just haul me out and shoot me, but they didn't.
The hostage takers were Khomeini supporters, but they had acted without his knowledge and without the knowledge of the interim government, whose members included both moderates and conservatives. Prime Minister Bazargan's deputy, Ibrahim Yazdi, was receiving the American chargé d'affaires, Bruce Lengen, at the moment the students broke into the embassy.
I was at the ministry, and my deputy called me and said that the Bruce Lengen, the American chargé d'affaires, is here. Something has happened extraordinary, wants to come and see you immediately. So he came, and they had some wireless phone, and they say that from inside embassy they have been informed that a student attack, they have taken over the embassy.
I spent the next 36 hours pounding on the desks, asking for help, not getting it, appreciating that Bazargan had no power from the moment the embassy was overrun, and that power was in the streets.
Wanting to resolve the situation quickly, Yazdi turned to Ayatollah Khomeini, knowing that he would be the only one with power to expel the students from the embassy. Having once before ordered students to leave the embassy, Yazdi was certain he would do the same again. But the hostage-taking proved popular on the streets of Tehran, where crowds had gathered in support of the students.
You know, he was very sensitive to the opinion of the masses. After the takeover, the television played a very important role. The leftists, the Tudors, the extremists, all they moved toward the American embassy. There was a big rally there. And that rally was broadcast, and that rally influenced Khomeini.
In response, Khomeini gave his support to the students. And in giving the siege his official stamp of approval, he set Iran on a collision course with the US.
For the students, the fact that the Imam had supported them and said this was a revolution bigger than the first was a very attractive thing. The Imam fought the revolution against the Shah, and this incident was against American interference, and he saw it as more important. It made us very happy. It meant a lot to be supported by the Imam.
But moderates within the interim government were outraged by Khomeini's decision to support the hostage-takers.
We were a government. We could ask American embassy to close down the embassy, leave all the personnel, leave the Iran. But we could not support or endorse the hostage-taking.
I think if somebody tries to chronicle all the damages that were done to Iran as a result of the hostage crisis, and damages I mean economic, political, emotional, you will find that it is one of the most stupid, one of the costliest decisions made by any government.
Yet, far from weakening his power base, Khomeini had calculated that his endorsing of the siege would strengthen his hand.
The hostage-taking was really directed at the provisional government of Bazargan, who were all devout Muslims, but secular. Although they were nationalists, they didn't want to cut off all ties with the United States because they realized the danger of that. And one way to undermine Bazargan and undercut him was to have the hostage crisis.
The tactic worked, and Bazargan's cabinet resigned en masse. Further emboldened, Khomeini conducted a referendum on a new constitution. It embodied elements of his own Velayat-e-Faqih ideology, which stated that power rests with the clergy and at its head is the supreme leader, in this case Khomeini himself, who was chosen by God.
The concept of Velayat-e-Faqih was one that was long in gestation. I mean, Khomeini had outlined this in 1971, but there are also quite interesting roots, you know, that can be found in Shia thought going back to the 19th century. And he basically said, well, you know, the religious authority has the primacy over the secular power.
In December 1979, the new constitution was approved by a huge majority, leaving the conservative clerics in control of the country and of the hostage crisis. The plight of the hostages would endure for 444 days until January 1981. Perhaps unsurprisingly, when freedom finally beckoned for the prisoners, they were initially reluctant to believe it.
All of a sudden, one morning, there's nobody around. And then we were told by 2 or 3 people, pack up, get yourself ready, you're going to be moved. Now, you know how many times we were told to move? You know how many times we did this? So, you know, why believe them this time? So we shuffled out, blindfolded again, put on buses, and we were driving, it seemed like interminably. It must have been a couple hours or an hour and a half. Stopped. They pulled our blindfolds off, and each person moved out of the bus.
Pushed down the steps of our bus and jerking our blindfolds off to be taunted and pushed and shoved and screamed at by hostage takers who were determined to have their last swipe at us.
And then there was this long line of Iranians who, in some weird fashion that was so un-Iranian to me, now I can't understand Iran for anything because it just was so wacky to me. They started to spit at us.
The hostages were freed within minutes of Ronald Reagan's inauguration as US president, his predecessor Jimmy Carter having been voted out of office, at least in part because of his handling of the affair. The crisis may have been over, but the mutual distrust would remain.
Iran's reputation had been discolored seriously with the hostage business. As it's, I can't emphasize too much, that sentiment of Iran as a hostage taker, still out there. They take people hostage, don't they? That's unfair to Iran, the people of Iran today. But the sentiment is still there, and that's one of the first instincts, the first reactions that the public has when the issue, when Iran comes up. Oh, that terrorist-supporting state, particularly a hostage-taking state.
And in Tehran, the crisis is remembered as a huge triumph for the nation. This part of the museum is known as the Role of Evil, and it depicts what the authorities say is all the evil in the world inspired by the United States. The irony being that such images are being shown in what used to be one of the most important American embassies in the whole of the Middle East. But this is about much more than just symbolism or propaganda, because what happened here was a crucial moment in the Islamic Revolution, a victory by Iran over America. The hostage crisis may have fatally damaged Iran's reputation abroad, but at home, Grand Ayatollah Khomeini was more powerful than ever. By now, though, he was embroiled in another battle with another enemy, one far closer to home. Both Ayatollah Khomeini and Saddam Hussein had come to power in 1979. The previous year, as vice president, Saddam had expelled Khomeini from his exile in Iraq at the request of the Shah. Little wonder then that the two were sworn enemies. And in September 1980, with Iran internationally isolated in the wake of the hostage crisis, Saddam saw his chance to invade his neighbor.
I cannot conceive that Saddam Hussein would have dared attack Iran if Iran was not that isolated. I cannot conceive that the US would have allowed Saddam to do that if Iran was not a post-hostage crisis.
Saddam's reasons for going to war are a matter for debate. Some suggest he was worried about the growing influence of Iran's clerics on Iraq's large Shia population. Others maintain that the war was all about territory.
Some people say the maximalist goal he had was that if he attacked Iran, the regime would collapse, so he wouldn't have to deal with an Islamic Republic. I think he had a more minimalist goal, was to regain control of the Shatt al-Arab.
The Iraqis initially planned to occupy the oil-rich border region of Khuzestan, but met with fierce and unexpected resistance.
In the first days, Saddam was saying that the war will end in 3 or 7 days. He thought that the Revolutionary Guards were a young force, and the army had received big blows.
Iranian forces, with the help of Khomeini's unswervingly loyal Revolutionary Guards, pegged the Iraqi military back, and in 1982, Saddam ordered his troops to withdraw completely from Iranian soil.
After 2 years, we succeeded to kick him out of our country and free our lands. That was the golden time that we could stop the war.
Saddam sought out a peace agreement with the Iranians, but Khomeini was determined to continue fighting until Saddam had been overthrown.
Ayatollah Khomeini, was persuaded by Ayatollah Rafsanjani, his closest aide, and he was persuaded by the top commanders of revolutionary that we have to go inside Iraq, we have to release conquer Basra. So they continued war for more than 6 years.
A war of attrition ensued, and the normal rules of engagement were quickly forgotten. The Iranians used so-called human waves of untrained, unarmed conscripts. Some as young as 12 years old were pulled out of school to attack the Iraqi front line. Meanwhile, Saddam used chemical weapons against Iran. The wider international community, keen to see Khomeini deposed, did nothing to stop him.
When Saddam attacked Iran, it caused great damage. He completely destroyed 15 of our cities. Many times he used chemical warfare. My disappointment was that some Western countries in America supported Saddam.
Nor did the United Nations intervene, even when it became widely known that Iraq was using banned weaponry. The feeling of having been abandoned by the international community is strong amongst Iranians even now.
You hear this up to this day in the rhetoric of Ahmadinejad and others, that there was this double standard, that the U.S. at best saw the UN as an avenue basically to beat up its enemies, and that it had been the victim, that is, Iran had been the victim of an unprovoked attack by Iraq, which it was, and that an attack that was eventually supported by the international community.
It's hard to really comprehend the scale of Iran's 8-year war with Iraq, but it's when you walk around this huge cemetery of Behej Zahra on the outskirts of Tehran that you begin to really appreciate the enormity of that conflict. By the time the war ended in August 1988, after the UN finally stepped in to mediate, more than 1 million people had been killed in one of the most deadly conflicts of the 20th century.
Yes, it was a very brutal war. Saddam used chemical weapons. He attacked defenseless people in cities. When he saw he wasn't achieving his goals, he attacked oil tankers in the Gulf. It was a very difficult time. But Iranians knew that if they did not stand up against the Ba'athist army, then their lands would be forever lost into the hands of the enemy.
With the Iranian economy faltering and the military having endured such heavy losses, it might have been expected that Khomeini's popularity would suffer. But the opposite was true. He was able to use the war to further consolidate the clerical grip on the Islamic Republic and the revolution.
It is taken for granted that the war, with its ruins, costs, and martyrs, halts progress. But it was a necessity of the revolution. We had to pay the cost to strengthen the revolution.
By the time the war was over, his health was in decline. A year after the ceasefire, on June 3rd, 1989, he died at the age of 86. The nation united in grief, with more than 2 million people attending the funeral of their supreme leader.
When the war ended, there was enormous relief in the country. It so happened that Khomeini died a very short time after the end of the war, so there was a new leadership. And the new president, Hashemi Rafsanjani, made it a major part of his policy and platform to say now the focus will be on internal reconstruction. So Iran entered a period, a post-Khomeini period, in which the great figure of the revolution was no longer there. His lieutenants had to make the decisions on their own.
Given how pivotal Ayatollah Khomeini was to the Islamic Revolution and the Republic, one would have thought that on his death, Iran would have faced an era of uncertainty, even instability. But it was the clergy as a class who are now in power, and they left nothing to chance. The succession was quick and decisive, and the role of supreme leader fell to Ayatollah Khamenei. And the smooth succession has continued to this day. The Islamic Republic of Iran remains a formidable regional presence, whose power is arguably greater than at any time during the last 30 years. And throughout the last 3 decades, there has been another constant for Iran: ongoing enmity with the USA. Modern Iran is now a regional superpower whose influence extends far beyond its borders. Iranians are at the center of Middle Eastern political affairs, from Lebanon to Iraq to Gaza. For the US and Israel, its age-old foes, this growing influence is a cause for alarm. And yet, this fear is nothing new. From the first days of the Islamic Republic, Grand Ayatollah Khomeini spoke of the need to export the revolution, and his first target in 1982 was Lebanon.
At that time, Israel invaded Lebanon and proceeded to the heart of Beirut during 1 week. The Israeli troops captured Beirut too. Israel claimed that it wanted to arrest the Palestinian militants and drive them out of South Lebanon.
Khomeini was determined to build a force to counter the Israeli invaders, but rather than send his own troops into Lebanon, he opted for resistance by stealth. His ever-loyal Revolutionary Guards would become central in taking the fight to Israel, without ever leaving Iranian soil. Instead, Lebanese Shia volunteers would be brought to Iran for training by this crack unit.
He said, "I will assign them a mission. They have to train young Lebanese forces to defend their own country, and they can drive out the enemy from their land with the background support of Iran."
So, following direct instructions from Khomeini, one of the Arab world's most feared and revered organizations was born: Hezbollah.
The foundation and formation of Hezbollah took shape with a very precise thinking of the Imam. Then the Lebanese forces were trained by the Revolutionary Guard in a very professional way in Camp Ginetta. Then they started their struggle against Israel.
As the summer war of 2006 demonstrated, the struggle continues to this day. And since Mahmoud Ahmadinejad became president in 2005, relations between Iran and Israel have worsened immeasurably. Beyond the name-calling and rhetoric, the issue of nuclear proliferation has heightened tensions in an already unstable region. Israel's arsenal of nuclear weapons is a constant source of discomfort to its Middle Eastern neighbors and reinforces suspicions of Western double standards. At the same time, Iran's determination to pursue a nuclear program continues to cause unease in the West, despite repeated Iranian assurances that such technology would be used only for peaceful purposes.
I must explain that nuclear energy is different from nuclear weapons. Nuclear science and energy can improve and shift a country like an engine. The issue of nuclear science has been misinterpreted by politicians.
And the father of Iran's nuclear program under the Shah agrees that Iran has a right to develop nuclear power and not just for peaceful purposes.
Why should not Iran have it? We are in a region that Pakistan has it, Israel has it, India has it, Russia has it. How is it that everybody has it now? Iran should not have it. Now, who is the judge in the world? America? They want to decide for the whole world? We have seen what they have done in Iraq. We have seen what they have done in Afghanistan. They have also in mind to do something against Iran. Every day I get up, somebody in America or in Israel, they say, we attack Iran, we attack nuclear facilities in Iran, and so on. This is amazing. They have made the war a very aggressive war. Attacking Iran has become a normal thing that you hear every day. And they say Iran is aggressive. They say Iran is going to make the bomb.
Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
The Bush administration made Iran its public enemy #1, characterizing it as a maverick nation hell-bent on harnessing nuclear power to further its sinister ambitions. And even with a new president in the White House, the axis of evil label has so far proven difficult to shed. Obama's Nowruz speech, promising a new beginning to US-Iranian relations, has been met with official caution. After 30 years of enmity, sanctions, and now encirclement, many Iranians feel it will take more than words.
This process will not be advanced by threats. We seek instead engagement that is honest and grounded in mutual respect.
American troops occupy the country immediately to the east of Iran, Afghanistan, immediately to the west of Iran, Iraq. To the south, the United States has nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, and we have air bases north of Iran in Central Asia. I'd be scared to death if I was in Iran.
Yet many Americans claim that they too are scared by Iranian saber-rattling.
The concern that I think has been accentuated by Ahmadinejad's rhetoric is that there is a kind of aggressive desire to identify one group or one country in this region whose existence is not acceptable, and to wipe it off the face of the earth.
Today, Iran is an independent country and is not subordinate to any country in the world. It doesn't accept orders from any country. It has reached its goals, independence and no subordination. And we are at the peak of this independence. The whole world says you shouldn't possess nuclear science. The Iranian nation says we must have it. And so does the government.
The firebrand speeches of Ahmadinejad portray a nation united in its opposition to Western governments. But in truth, a battle continues behind the scenes, a battle for the very soul of the Islamic Revolution. The Islamic Republic is defined by two paradoxical political beliefs. On the one side are the ultra-conservative clerics and their followers, whose interests are represented by President Ahmadinejad. On the other side, you have the reformists, a more moderate face of the Republic, represented by ex-President Khatami, and now former Prime Minister and presidential candidate Mir Hossein Mousavi.
If you look at basically the differences between the Khatami administration and the Ahmadinejad administration, you have the two poles. I mean, you have the two wings of the revolution still fighting it out. One that says that this is an Islamic Republic with the emphasis on the Republic, and the other saying this is, with the emphasis on the Islamic. I mean, and the Republic is actually rather irrelevant to everything.
Under Ahmadinejad, Iran has pursued a policy of confrontation with the West. Economic sanctions have done nothing to soften this stance. But the more moderate Iranian political wing favors a different course.
Mr. Khatami introduced his theory of dialogue among civilizations in the United Nations and his theory of dialogue among cultures and religions. He was capable at that time to lower the tension, but Mr. Ahmadinejad has chosen a different method. In my opinion, this method has its losses and gains. We must remember that Ahmadinejad became president of Iran at a time when US President Bush used very strong language against Iran. Ahmadinejad, in such a situation, applied more offensive policies.
That is a natural consequence of, again, some of the pressures that were put upon Iran, particularly when Khatami was speaking about the dialogue among civilizations, was promoting basic freedoms, political rights in the country. Then suddenly Iran is put in the axis of evil, and a new series of threats against Iran are launched. This puts Iran in a very difficult circumstances. A lot of the radicalism that occurs in countries like Iran is a result of these pressures coming from abroad, particularly in countries where you're dealing with a long history of foreign intervention.
On the 12th of June, Iranians go to the polls to elect a new president. In global terms, the results may prove to be no less important than last November's American elections. But beneath the surface, Iranian society in the 21st century is surprisingly varied and nuanced. Revolution quickly set the nation on a path of conflict that continues to this day. Permanently at odds with Western values, constantly on the precipice of all-out conflict, modern-day Iran appears to have nothing whatsoever in common with its pre-revolutionary allies, such as the US and the UK.
The political elites in both Iran and the United States have enormous difficulties with each other. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And one wouldn't want to ascribe blame to one over the other. But I think there is a general surprise among Iranians as a whole that this dispute has gone on for quite so long. I mean, it's far longer than the dispute with Vietnam.
And yet Iran faces many of the same challenges within its society as those of its Western foes. Perhaps most surprisingly of all, it leads the world when it comes to a social ill often seen as an exclusively Western preserve, drug addiction. For Iran has the highest number of heroin addicts per head in the world. How extensive today is the problem of addiction that the Iranian government is dealing with? Do you know roughly in terms of numbers affected?
The estimated number of addicts in our country has been collated by researching the amount of in- and outpatients seeking treatment in the past few years. We have had between 1 million to 1.8 million seeking treatment.
About 6% of Iranians are reported to be regular users of opiates, compared to just 0.1% of Americans. How long is he has needle marks everywhere? How long has he been an addict? 25 years. But Iran has a drug treatment program that would be the envy of many Western nations. If the scale of Iran's drug problem is surprising, then its enlightened approach to the illnesses that addiction can cause is no less remarkable. With rates of HIV infection rising in tandem with intravenous drug use, the government has instituted a health awareness program that far exceeds its Middle Eastern neighbors in terms of its openness.
In many Islamic countries, it's difficult to bring up the issue of AIDS. In Islamic countries, there may be more taboos or sensitivities.
And whether one is talking about the West or the East, there are few more sensitive subjects than transsexuality. Yet, in Iran, sex changes are not only legal and state-funded, but seemingly sanctioned by the nation's original supreme leader.
Perhaps, contrary to what is perceived in other countries, sex change is more acceptable in Iran than other places. This is because Imam Khomeini issued a fatwa that we are among the sexual disordered categories, not sexually deviated categories. He said we can change sex to become a female, so we can choose our sex. There is even an advantage in Iran for us to change our names in the identity card. In most countries, the name doesn't change. But according to the Imam's fatwa and the law, transsexuals live more comfortably in Iran than other countries. We have rights and advantages here. The society and law have accepted us well. We don't have any problems in Iran.
However, the same cannot be said for others. In 2007, President Ahmadinejad drew widespread condemnation when he stated that there were no homosexuals in Iran.
در کشور ما چنین چیزی وجود ندارد. در ایران این چیزا وجود. در ایران.
In fact, the truth is much darker. Homosexuals are routinely persecuted in Iran. And this is just one area where Iran's human rights record remains far from perfect.
It does not give any room for opposition. It does not give any leeway for people to express themselves. There's no freedom of expression. And this is the nature of this regime. And for me as an Iranian, a state that treats its opponents, its Iranian brothers and sisters, it's the people that it has to take care of. I mean, the priority of any government is towards its own people first.
This is the Ebrat Museum, set up to commemorate the human rights abuses of the former regime of the Shah and his brutal security service, Sabak. There is even a somewhat macabre gift shop where you can take home a keyring with the mugshot of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini. But Iran's shameful human rights record is certainly not confined to a museum. In fact, state-sponsored abuse is one of the few constants to have survived the revolution. Hashem Sabagian claims to have been tortured both by pre- and post-revolutionary forces.
As far as I am concerned, as an arrested person in both regimes, the behavior of the previous regime was much better than the current regime's behavior with me. The encounter I had with the Shah's services whilst under arrest was very endurable and easier for me compared to what they did. I am not ready to go into more details.
But many of the clerics and their supporters insist that allegations of human rights abuses in Iran have been exaggerated for political ends.
Look, are human rights being respected in other places thoroughly? They're not maintained. There are problems in other places, and we have our problems too. There are many places where human rights are not observed. There are many problems. There is no pressure on them, but a full-scale pressure is on us. It's a political issue. I would like to tell the truth. We also have our problems and weaknesses. We have to solve them.
And one woman who is determined to solve such issues is Shireen Ebadi, whose legal career predates the revolution.
But after the revolution, they told me that because I am a woman, I cannot continue in this job. And they turned me and other female judges into ordinary office clerks in the Justice Ministry. I couldn't accept this. A short while after, they accepted my early retirement. I retired myself and became a lawyer.
And in the eyes of the law, women are often victims of inequality. Although they are allowed to vote from the age of 15, they are still legally second-class citizens. A woman is half a man, whether a witness in court or in divorce. The legal age of marriage is 13 for a girl and 15 for a boy. But the most visible symbol of this Islamic regime is that women are no longer entitled to choose what they wear. They must wear Islamic dress or hijab.
The young people feel that they have the right to decide about the way that they dress. On the other hand, the more traditional sectors of society, they fear the very consumerist, materialist type of model which is being promoted for women's advancement in the West. They fear that that would degrade her human dignity and it would be contrary to Islamic values. So there is this cultural debate, and it's a very serious issue.
Shireen Ebadi, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003 as a result of her fearless campaigning, particularly for women's rights in Iran, agrees that there is still much work to be done.
The situation in Iran as far as human rights are concerned is far from ideal. That's why I'm in Iran and I've decided to live and work here to defend human rights. When everything is fine, there is no need for us to defend human rights.
But others suggest that women have actually made great strides under the Islamic Republic.
You have to have a holistic picture of what happened in Iran. We have challenges in terms of women's rights, but we also have women entering government in 1997. We have women becoming vice presidents in Iran. The growth rate of, for example, women entering university, it's huge.
At our universities, there are 58% girls and 42% boys. This shows a bright future to have an educated mother and family. We can benefit from it.
Increasingly more educated than Iranian men, Iran's women now represent about 30% of the workforce. But with unemployment at above 12.5%, many educated women, unable to find jobs that are suited to their qualifications, are looking for new ways to make ends meet. In 2006, the first female taxi drivers were recruited onto Tehran's streets. Although this service is exclusively for women, Araste gave me a glimpse into her life as a cab driver and as a woman in modern-day Iran.
I got this job through a newspaper advertisement. I understood from the advert that a taxi company was recruiting women taxi drivers in Iran for the first time. Since it was a first for this kind of job, I was more interested in doing it. We have satellite TV at our home, and when I watch the TV channels, I think that in comparison to other places, Iranians value women more. Here, men value women. It's not that our government does not allow certain things, it reacts to the culture of the society. So men should work, and women must have less social activities, and they should work at home. This is due to our culture, not something imposed by our government. There is no such objection for us. It's rather the common law of our society. Even my current job was looked upon as a male's job at first, due to society and traditions. We broke the tradition of the society. Now it's seen as normal. People have accepted it now, and the government has not put any hindrance in front of us. It was just a part of social customs.
As Iranians continue to define what the revolution has meant for them at home, internationally, the nation still struggles to be understood, and old enmities remain as strong as ever. The Islamic Revolution is one of the defining revolutions of the modern age. 30 years on, Iran is at another crossroads, trying to define itself for a new generation and in its relations with the West. Whatever happens next in this country will have an impact on the region and the world. But one thing is clear: the Islamic Republic is here to stay, and the world will have to accept that.